See, indifference curve is all about utility approach, where a consumer's preference remains the same. So indifference curve is a part of utility approach. Expansion path is a part of isoquant analysis in production, where we study total production as a function of two inputs. Indifference curve approach is defines that when an individual uses various combination of two commodities, if the individual is deriving same amount of satisfaction with different combination of quantities, with that data, when we arrive at a curve that is known as indifference curve, where the preference of the consumer remains indifferent. So indifference curve is a part of utility as a chapter, and expansion path is a part of production as a chapter. I'll be starting in 3 minutes time. Still to go. Hi Shweta, hi Afreen. Just go through what is being displayed. A very good morning to all of you. Others will join in, or they join in late? What is the normal trend? Okay, they should be joining. Okay, so we'll start off the session. It is exactly 10 o'clock in my laptop. See, till now we covered about economics, which starts with goods and services being produced with resources which are scarce in nature, and that is why these scarce resources need to be utilized in the best possible way. That led to what we term as genesis of economics. It is all about using scarce resources in the best possible manner. From that, we finally concluded that economics can be applied at different level. The concept of economics, one study which fundamentally studies the nation as a whole, and economics of a nation as a whole is known as macroeconomics, and microeconomics is that part of economics which deals with economics of an individual firm, individual consumer, or individual industry. From that, we finally concluded what is managerial economics. It is that part of economics which is used by managers for their decision making. That is what is termed as managerial economics. It comprises of both micro and macroeconomics. In this portion of our syllabus, we will be basically covering up demand and supply, production cost. We rather have covered up already demand and supply, production cost, market structures I will be dealing today. So that comes under the scope of managerial economics. There are certain basic concepts that we underline which are important from economics point of view, that it is basically a fundamental study of variables where we study demand function and their demand function and other kinds of functional relationships like supply function, cost function, production function. These functional relationships actually form the basis of the entire study of microeconomics, in which we study demand, supply, production, cost, and market structures. So in managerial economics, we study not only variables, their relationships also, for which the relationship is identified through correlation and analysis, and regression confirms the exact relationship, and the output or the result is always in the form of an equation. There are not many equations that you will find in your study material which are all a part of these fundamental relationships which have been finalized by the economist using the data that they collected. Then we covered up demand, where basically in this chapter the entire discussion was in and around what we term as law of demand, which says that demand is a function of price, keeping all other factors as constant, and there is an inverse relationship between demand and price. So you can see that our entire focus is demand and price in the chapter demand, where only two variables have been discussed, and we along with that discovered what is exception of law of demand and what are the reasons of law of demand. Then we talked about elasticity, where elasticity is a measure or a concept which usually which is all about understanding the sensitivity between two variables. So when we study elasticity for managerial economics, basically in demand as a chapter, it takes this shape, that is it has four types: price elasticity, income elasticity, cross elasticity, and advertising elasticity, where the basic formula is percentage change in demand upon percentage change in price for price elasticity, so on so forth. As you can see, percentage change in demand upon percentage change in income for income elasticity. Cross elasticity we covered up, percentage change in demand of one product upon percentage change in demand of another product. Advertising elasticity is all about percentage change in demand upon percentage change in advertising budget, I have put across, wherein we also concluded that price elasticity is always positive and it ranges between 0 to infinity. After that, in our discussions, we identified the relationship between elasticity and total revenue in in an organization, because it is the total revenue which is which holds a very strategic point in any organization, that where organization can maximize its total revenue. So based on our theoretical and mathematical discussions, we identified the relationship between average revenue, marginal revenue, and total revenue, where total revenue is equal to price into quantity, and we identified the relationship based on derivations, that what is marginal revenue. As you can see, first, marginal revenue is the change in total revenue when one extra unit of the product is sold in the market, where we consider total revenue as a function of quantity here. Then based on our analysis of total revenue, which is nothing but price into quantity, we finally concluded the relationship between marginal revenue, price, and elasticity, which is as shown. Marginal revenue is equal to price into 1 minus 1 upon E. E here is price elasticity, P is price. That is the basic fundamental relationship. And finally, based on this discussion of average revenue, marginal revenue, and total revenue, we concluded that total revenue is maximum when marginal revenue is equal to 0. That graph is there in your books. So that is what we have covered so far. Just one important concept, before starting off with the session today. We always talk about in economics marginals, okay, and these marginals are marginal revenue, marginal cost, and marginal product. I am giving you 1 minute time. Just read this, what is marginal revenue, marginal cost, and marginal product. The reason being, these concepts we will be using today for the analysis that we will be doing. Okay, so just read it, take 1 minute time and read it. All of you can see this. So marginal revenue is the change in total revenue, one extra unit of the product is sold in the market. Marginal cost is the change in total cost when one extra unit of the product is produced in the organization. Both are functions of quantity, but they have a different logic altogether. And marginal product is the change in the total product when one extra unit of input is added to the production process. That is, we use production function which says total production is a function of inputs. So that is what is marginal product. Then we came to this chapter of production, where we covered up law of variable proportions, which is basically an understanding of the production function when total product is equal to function of one input. What happens in the scenario when only one input changes and rest of the inputs remain the same? We talked about law of variable proportions, and then we did isocost and isoquant analysis based on the relationship where we identified two inputs, I1 and I2. What happens to total product when it is a function of only two inputs? So that is what we have covered so far, okay, in economics as a subject. Then we came to cost, where we covered up economies of scale. And what is economies? Economies of scale is all about average cost coming down in an organization when the scales of production go up. So till now we have covered this. Yes, Tanjit, you have any comments to make? Economies of scope is all about the potential of the organization. What is the scope of economies of scale within an organization, that is what is economies of scope. To what level and extent an organization can bring its costs down, that is what is economies of scope. It basically applies to diversified firms where organizations are producing more than one product. To what extent they are able to bring average cost down when they are producing more than one product. It can be complementary or other diversified products. So to what extent the average cost can come down when they are producing more than one product, that is what is economies of scope all about, which pertains to one organization and its scope of economies of scale. So that is where we actually concluded our discussion. I think all of you have started your studies. Now I will be carrying forward. Any questions you all have till now before starting off? I will do that. I will do that for you guys. There is one thing we actually had covered cost also, but I am going to take it up in a short term exercise. The reason being I am unsure whether you are able to recollect that or not. For those who have joined in late, I am just putting on the recap. We started off with economics, production of goods and services in a nation, scarcity of resources, so they need to be utilized in the best possible manner. That is related to genesis of economics. Yeah, can you hear me now? Okay, so this is what we have covered so far, and now today I will be starting off with cost. Whatever outline we have done, outline of cost, then I'll be covering to market structures, and then I'll be covering up the last three chapters, that is national income, and a little bit about inflation, and last portion or last chapter of your syllabus, that comprises of business cycle, that is all about recession and boom. Just give me a moment. I'm uploading the presentation right now. Meanwhile, all of you can just recap what we have covered so far. What is economies of scale? Everybody? What is economies of scale? I think I talked about economies of scale. That is a fundamental phenomena when average cost comes down. Okay, now to talk about, yes, it is not lowering of cost, Tanjit, it is average cost which comes down. If you all remember, I'll just start off with the same example that I had started off. I'll talk about, say, let us talk about, say, printing of cards, and we identified that there is a process that is related to printing of cards. We will be doing this case first of printing of cards for a short run analysis, then I will come to what is a long run case when we talk about, say, the cost, how it changes. Now as we talk about, say, printing of cards, all of you can recollect we talked about, say, let us say 500 rupees is the setup cost, which includes designing and setting up of the machine. Then we talked about 6 rupees as a variable cost, which includes paper, ink, electricity, labor cost and other variable cost per unit of cards. We identified an equation, that is total cost is equal to 500 plus 6x. That is what we had covered that day. Now come to this portion where I have written down total cost is equal to fixed cost plus variable cost. Total cost is equal to 500 plus 6x, where x represents unit of cards. As you can see, when we print 100 cards, when x is 100, total cost is 1100 rupees. When x is 200, total cost is 1700 rupees. When x is 300, total cost is 2300 rupees. What is happening when our level of production is going up from 100 to 200 to 300? All of you can observe as a phenomena that even the total cost is going up for an organization. I hope you understand the difference between cost and price. Cost is whatever money that is incurred on inputs in an organization. So total cost is going up when output is going up, but average cost, that is total cost upon x or the unit produced, is coming down from 11 rupees to 8 rupees 50 paisa to 7 rupees 60 paisa. All of you can understand this, I guess. I think it is clear. We have discussed this already. Okay, so assuming that all of you have understood this fact, based on this analysis, mathematical analysis, I have prepared two graphical representations out here. The first graph is all about total cost, fixed cost and total variable cost when the number of cards go up. What happens in that scenario? The first I'll just use a marker for this. Yes, this is here total cost, this is variable cost, and this is fixed cost, that is 500 in our case that we have identified. So this is fixed cost, this is variable cost, and this is total cost when we make a graphical representation out of it. But when we make an average cost curve of average total cost, average variable cost and average fixed cost, the graphical representation is what is appearing just next to it, just parallel to it. You can see average cost, average total cost comes down, as it is coming down here also, 11 rupees, 8 rupees 50 paisa, 7 rupees 60 paisa. So see, you can easily observe that average cost here is coming down. It is reaching at its lowest point and then again it is shooting up when the output level goes up beyond a certain level. Okay, so this is what we talked about, that when output level goes up, average cost comes down, it comes to its lowest point and then it starts increasing. Now for an organization, decreasing cost, that is average cost coming down from 11 to 8 rupees 50 paisa to 7 rupees 60 paisa is a good indication. The reason being, the lower the cost, the better profitability for the organization. So we can say here that average cost, when it comes down, it is a good and healthy sign, and it comes down because of what we term as economies of scale. Okay, so because of economies of scale, average cost comes down and it reaches its minimum point, and then again it starts increasing because of diseconomies of scale. Because in a short run, what happens is, some of the inputs are fixed, some of the inputs are variable. So fixed inputs have their own capacity to absorb. Beyond that capacity, if you are going to overutilize those fixed inputs, then rather than average cost coming down, it starts going up. So there is a set in of what we term as diseconomies of scale. Therefore our average total cost curve is mostly what we find as a U-shaped graph, as you all can observe. I am just showing again. This is our average total cost curve. There is a marginal cost curve. Marginal cost, of course, is the change in total cost when one extra unit of product is produced. Marginal cost curve cuts average total cost curve from below at the lowest point, and that is the point where organization should restrict their output levels, because beyond that, if organization is going to produce more, then average cost goes up, which leads to decrease in the profitability of the product. So that is what is average total cost curve. In general, it is also known as SRAC, that is short run average cost curve. It is basically a U-shaped curve, wherein when we identified average variable cost here, then also we can observe that this is average variable cost, and average fixed cost, of course, keeps on coming down only, it will never go up. So it's more of a L-shaped curve, which actually is tending towards 0. So this is what we covered in cost, short run cost, where this is a simple case. When we talk about, say, printing of cards is a very simple case, but when we talk about, say, organizations, when we talk about, say, complexity that is existing in organizations, then we can say that cost and costing is a very, very complex phenomena there, because there are many kinds of costs that are included in the organization. This case was a very simple one. It is not so simple when it comes to actual organization. So when economists observed the same phenomena for manufacturing and complex and other industries and organizations, they observed that rather than the pattern being a straight pattern, it is something like this. As you can see, that total cost, rather than being a straight graphical curve, is in realistic situations more of a curve which sometimes shapes up like what I have shown with blue line. So in the total cost curve, that this is a more realistic total cost curve which economists observed. Of course, economists when they observed that initially, because of economies of scale, there is a decreasing trend. That what happens is production output level is going up at a higher rate, and input percentage change is comparatively less. For example, suppose organization is increasing by output by 100%. Okay, initially cost might increase by 50%. It is a very good indication for any organization. The reason being, if the output is going at a higher if whatever is the percentage change in the output and the cost percentage change is less, it is good for the organization. Again, I am repeating, if organization increases its output by 100% and its cost only increases by 50%, it is good for the organization. So that is what economists observed, that initially because of economies of scale this kind of pattern was observed. Then after a certain output level, there was diseconomies of scale. In this diseconomies of scale, what happens? There is a reverse phenomena, that by whatever percentage output is increasing, suppose output is increasing by 100%, then the cost might go up by more than 100%, let us say by 150%, which is of course not a very healthy situation for any organization if its total cost is going up at a higher percentage rate. So that is where this total cost analysis helps organization in identifying that what output levels it should produce, what are the optimum output levels which helps the organization in taking their fundamental decisions also. Okay, so that is, I think we have covered this portion before also, so I need not go beyond this. There is one small question to you all, those who all are attending today. See, I have made another curve that is down out here, SAC1 and SAC2, short run average cost 1 and short run average cost 2. Okay, where short run average cost 2 is average cost of firm 2, average cost curve of firm 2, and SAC1 is average cost of firm 1. Okay, now my question to you guys is, which organization is better, firm A or firm B? Okay, SAC2 B. Okay, yes, it is able, this organization is able to control its cost by having good organization cost reduction strategies and all, standardization or other strategies which helps the organization, or better management you can say, which helps the organization to lower its average cost, which is always good because it increases the profit margins for any organization. Okay, so see, every individual organization might have different position of its short run average cost curve. That is purely situational, and that purely depends on the kind of strategy the organization is putting across. Okay, so that is where we should understand that if there are two different organizations, their short run average cost curve can be higher, the position can be higher, lower, upward or lower, depending on what kind of strategies organizations are able to have and whether it is resulting in cost advantages in the organization or not. So this was all about the short run cost curve. Now this next that I am displaying is a long run average cost curve, which is known as LRAC. Long run average cost curve is all about when organization expands in a long run scenario. Okay, now when I talk about say any organization expanding in a long run scenario, then let us take this example of mineral water plant. Okay, suppose Pepsi is having a plant in Mumbai and it is producing, say, let us say 1 lakh bottles per month. That is the capacity of the plant. Okay, what happens to the management decision when they decide to increase their capacity by 5%, let us say by 5,000 bottles? They can very well easily accommodate in the same setup that they already have, which is there in the plant 1. But what happens to the scenario when Pepsi decides to increase its output, let us say to around 1,50,000? What should it do if it has to increase its capacity or potential? What should Pepsi do if it has to increase its capacity? Let us say in Mumbai, where summers and winters doesn't hold much of importance. Yes, extend prediction units. That is, possibly if the output has to be increased to a very high level, then Pepsi has to set up another plant or another production unit, which can be said as plant number 2 or production unit number 2. I am explaining you, Arun, that is why I am explaining you. Yeah, I will explain all the nitty-gritties. Just hold back, just give me some 5-10 minutes, everything will be clear to you. Okay, so if Pepsi wants to increase its capacity to 1,50,000, set up another plant. Okay, it has to go to 2 lakh or maybe 3 lakh, set up another plant. Okay, so if Pepsi finds that in India its demand is going up because of its good promotion strategy, so on and so forth, it will keep on setting up successive production units, that is plant number 1, plant number 2, plant number 3, which is all about expansion in long run. Every organization, when it expands, it has to keep on setting up successive production units, machines, or what we term as fixed inputs. Now here in this case, in this graphical representation that I have put across, I say short run average cost curve 1. That means it is short run average cost curve for plant number 1. Short run average cost curve 2 means I have missed out 2 here. I have directly come to 3, SRAC 3. SRAC 3 means plant number 3. SRAC 4 means plant number 4. SRAC 5 means plant number 5. SRAC means plant number 6. These are all short term average curves, or SRAC, short run average cost curve, that we have done just just before this. Okay, these are short run average cost curve for successive production units. SRAC 1, SRAC 2 I have missed out here, SRAC 3, SRAC 4, SRAC 5, SRAC 6. Are you able to connect to this graph out here? Then I'll come to what is LRAC. Yes, Gauri, what are the reasons? I'll talk about. Okay, are you able to understand this graph? Let us go step by step. Everybody else, I'd like to have your responses first, then only I'll move ahead. Okay, so all of you can understand what do I mean by short run average cost 1, short run average cost 2, so on so forth. Okay, now listen to me. You might be having many questions in your mind कि ऐसा क्यों है that it is always U-shaped or something like this. Now see, any organization, when it grows from small to big, which we have already identified as a fact, that organizations become prudent. They are able to manage their cost in a much better form when they grow. Okay, if they are putting in good management strategies, decision making becomes more wiser. What happens is, for any organization which grows, there is some economies of scale which sits in the organization, which can be due to production economies of scale, managerial economies of scale, division of labor, better transportation, or financial economies of scale, marketing economies of scale. There can be n number of factors which can lead to what we term as, when organization sets up successive production units, its average cost might come down. Okay, because of economies of scale. Economies of scale can be because of better decision making, or there can be n number of other factors, better production and cost reduction policies, so on and so forth. So there are chances that when organizations grow and when they set up successive production units, or when they increase their capacity, their average cost might come down. Okay, but when organizations do expand in long term, okay, what can be the disadvantages? They can become unmanageable. Like, for example, there was some rumor some time back which said that ICICI bank has become unmanageable because it has become too large. So there can be certain disadvantages which can set in an organization due to communication gaps, due to more number of branches, isolation of managers, or maybe hierarchy level going up, decision making taking more time. Because of that, rather than the average cost coming down, when the organization further expands, okay, like as you can see in SRAC 5 and SRAC 6, when organization has become unmanageable and it does further expansion, so rather than the average cost coming down, it starts shooting up. It is all a scenario where organization is unable to manage too huge in expansion. Okay, necessarily not with the case, in the case of every organization. Okay, now in this graph that what I have drawn is, I have drawn that initially the successive production units are coming down, SRAC is coming down, then it starts going up from SRAC 5 and SRAC 6. Okay, I am typically taking into consideration an organization which initially is able to manage its expansion pretty nicely in long term, but when it becomes unmanageable, then there is diseconomies of scale which sets in, and when it sets up production units further, rather than the average cost coming down, it starts shooting up. So because of economies of scale it comes down, because of diseconomies of scale it goes up, because it can become unmanageable when it further expands. But here one thing, what is long run average cost curve? Long run average cost curve here is when we join the tangential points of the successive short run average cost curve. That curve, which you can see a long curve out here, which I will point out also, this curve is known as, which is joining the tangential points of all the short run average cost curve, is known as LRAC. That is what we term as long run average cost curve. Okay, and this long run average cost curve also has its what we term as LMC, that is long run marginal cost, which cuts this curve at the lowest point. But if any organization, what happens to the scenario when some organization is able to manage its cost? Okay, we should try and understand that phenomena also. So we can say that always it is not required that this LRAC is always U-shaped. If some organization, as I am putting it across, as you can see, if some organization is able to manage its expansion and has good policies, then it can have an L-shaped long run average cost curve also, necessarily not be always a U-shaped curve. Okay, because long run if organizations are able to do good, then they can manage their cost pretty well, and when they are expanding and they are having their short run average cost curves, rather than this LRAC being U-shaped, it can be L-shaped also, or it can take some other shape also. So I have written this down also for you guys, that is short run average cost curve is always U-shaped, but long run average cost curve may or may not be U-shaped. L-shaped is preferable, where organizations are able to maintain its average cost at a lower level when it expands in long run. Okay, so is this clear, or you have any questions to ask from this also? Anybody having any questions regarding this? Some of you were confused also. Okay, so I think cost as a chapter is very simple. There is nothing much in it. You will be able to sail through it very easily. It is not that tough a chapter. Okay, and interesting one will be when today we will be going to do national income. It's a beautiful topic, national income and inflation. So before coming to national income and inflation, I will come to your next chapter, that is market structures. What is a market? Before we start off with market structures, I think we have already covered a few points about it. What does a market comprise of? Okay, so a market comprises of a product, okay, which is demanded by the consumer, and the same product being supplied by the supplier at a particular price. That is what is a market. Okay, so goods and competition can be one idea. So that is what is market. What do you understand by market structure? For example, if I ask you what is the market structure of railways in India? Who demands it? Who supplies it? At what price? If I ask you market structure of railways in India, How is it shaped up? What is your idea about it? Okay, so a market comprises of buyers and sellers. There is a product and there is a price. That is what is market structure. Now in economics, this is all about competition. Please remember this fact, then that in economics, in market structure, we actually study the composition of an industry as a whole, that how any industry shapes up, how many buyers are there, how many sellers are there, what is the product, what is the price of the product, and in that competition how organizations decide their price and output strategy. That is what is this market structure as a chapter all about, wherein we actually study an industry as a whole. Because if I say railways and its market structure in India, then I can say the seller is only one, that is the government, which supplies Indian railway services to the buyers. Who are the buyers? The entire population of India, most of the section of the population of India. The product is not a product, but it is a service, and price is being decided by the seller only. Government decides the reservation prices and we have to accept it. That is what is the market structure when we talk about, say, railways. But if I talk about, say, airways, it is differently shaped up. For example, in airlines we have some 5 to 6 major airlines which are having most of the stakes or market share, and these are supplying these services to various customers, and now these customers are also not the entire population, but only a section of the society which can actually afford airlines. Okay, in that also we have certain low cost airlines, or deluxe, or superior airlines, that is also categorized. So market structure for airways is different, for railways it is different in Indian scenario, where in airlines we have private players also, but in railways we have only government which has its presence. So that is how market structure of airways has shaped up, and that is how market structure of railways has shaped up. When we talk about, say, various goods and services that are produced in a nation, how the market structure shapes up is very, very important, because it leads to the pricing part, which decides the profitability of every organization that is a part of that particular industry. You can just read what is market structure from this. Basically it is a study of as to how pricing should be done in an industry, and also it refers to the organizational features of an industry that influence the firm's behavior in its choice of price and output. Now any organization which is part of the industry, how that industry shapes up, the firm decides its prices. Like in airline industry, various airlines keep on changing their strategies of pricing, whereas railways decides it because it's a monopoly. So that is what is the relevance of market structures. Now this is a conceptual discussion and a very important discussion out here, where we will discuss the features of market structure. Based on this we will coming to what is oligopoly, what is perfect competition, what is imperfect competition, so on and so forth. Now in a market there are buyers and sellers. There can be one seller in the market, two seller in the market, three sellers in the market, or huge number of sellers in the market. It all depends on what kind of market structures we are talking about. Then comes the product, which can be homogeneous or heterogeneous. What is the difference between homogeneous and heterogeneous product? Any examples? Examples of homogeneous product? When the product, yes Gauri, can you give me an example of this? Nobody? Okay, see, when the product remains similar in the market and you cannot identify who has produced it. For example, suppose I go to market and buy some let me say some fruit grain like rice. Okay, a particular quality of rice, I don't know who has produced it. Okay, that particular quality of rice will remain same across, or in previous days you can say salt, where salt nowadays of course there is a distinguishing factor, but previously it used to be the same. Or we say for example LPG. Now the features of the product, the price of the product, the qualities of the product remains the same irrespective of the vendor that you use. Okay, so those kind of products which have similar features and similar prices in the market, where you cannot identify who has produced it. Of course in LPG you can, but I'm only talking about homogeneous product. These products are known as homogeneous products. Heterogeneous products wherein are all about is all about those products which you can identify. For example, if I say soap, now soap is a product, but there are so many brands of soap available in the market. Like for example, you can talk about Dove, you can talk about Rexona, you can talk about Liril, you can talk about blah blah blah, so many number of soap. Product is the same, but every brand that is being delivered in the market comes with a different shape, size, color, packaging, and of course you know, because of the value proposition, its brand positioning differs. According to that, its price also differs in the market. Liril is differently priced, Dove is differently priced. So there can be products in the market which are homogeneous or heterogeneous in nature. Then the next point about conceptual discussion out here is mobility of factors of production. Mobility of factors of production here means inputs that are used in an industry. If an industry closes down, then whether the factors of production can be easily moved into another industry, that is where we are talking about mobility of factors of production. Like for example, again I'll speak of the airline industry, which fits into my example here. Like suppose most of the airlines face losses and they close down. Mobility of the skilled staff from airline industry to some other industry becomes tough. Okay, but there can be certain other industries from which, you know, moving from one industry to another industry, factors of production can be easily moved. Okay, so there is another point which is known as mobility of factors of production. Then comes entry and exit conditions here. Now entry and exit conditions are all about entering into an industry. For example, suppose in India I want to enter into an agriculture industry. Okay, so to enter into agriculture industry, I need to buy a farmland. I need to hire few people who can actually help me in producing, and I can carry it forward. Not much of you know, a tussle when it. But suppose I want to enter into airline industry, is it tough or is it easy? Tougher. Why it is tough? Lot of licensing required, lot of huge investments, lot of financial reputation required. Then I need to procure aircrafts, I need to procure skilled staff. Okay, there is a stiff competition that is existing in the market. It is a very tough entry condition if I have to enter into an airline industry. So in some industries, when, you know, new players enter, it is relatively easier, and in some other industries it is relatively tough when new players want to enter into that industry. That you know, defines the entry and exit conditions of an industry. Entry in agriculture is tough, easy, and even exit is also easy. If I make losses, I want to come out of it, what I need to do is, only difficulty will be in selling that land off. Okay, I can sell that land and then move out of that industry easily. But if I have to come out of the airline industry like Mr. Malia, he is facing huge losses, but coming out is a tough task. The reason being, already huge investment, huge stakes, skilled manpower which needs to be catered to. They have their own conditions, demands and everything. So even exiting out of this industry, airline industry, is not easy. If you make losses, you have an option of getting merged or getting acquired by some other airline. For example, it happened with Sahara some few years back. So entry is also tough in airline industry and exit is also tough. Okay, so that is what is we identify here with entry and exit conditions into an industry when we are talking about. Then perfect knowledge of the product is there with the consumers. That is another feature. Government interference may or may not be there, but most of the modern economies, if government is not directly intervening, it intervenes indirectly through its regulatory bodies. It interferes in the private businesses. Collusion and cartel. When players or when the sellers come together, form a consortium or a group and give the same prices to the market in order to avoid internal competition, and they make a group, that is known as a cartel. Like for example, OPEC, OPEC. OPEC is a body of Gulf countries which are producing oil. They have come together, they formed a legal group and they are giving the same prices to the market, which is a very legal way. Whereas when we talk about, say, Bombay and its real estate, we say that for every area in Mumbai, the builders have an informal cartel. Okay, and they give same prices to the consumers. Their prices do not vary much. Okay, so when there can be informal cartel, there can be formal cartels. It all depends on the kind of situation that is existing in an industry. Now based on these features, okay, there are different kinds of market structures that have been identified, and these market structures are, I'll just classification is done based on these features of market structure, that is perfect competition and imperfect competition comprises of monopolistic competition, oligopoly with and without perfect distribution, duopoly and monopoly. So we will be doing these. You can just have a look at it for 1 minute, and first of all I am going to take a break in which I am going to display a case study for you which will purely identify with perfect competition. Displaying a case study. Just wait for a few minutes. Is my voice clear, everybody? Are you all able to connect to the class today? I think last time we have had so many problems. This time I have made sure that you all don't suffer this time. See, this is the case study I would like you to read for next 10 minutes when I am taking a break. Read it. It is all about credit card industry in US and how it behaved like a perfect competition. What is a perfect competition? With this case study we'll come to that. You can take into consideration while reading this case study how many players are there, what is the product, how many sellers are there, how many buyers are there, what is the entry and exit condition, how the price of credit card industry or the interest rate is being decided, whether it remains the same or not. All these features what we have covered for market structure you can identify in this case study. How many players are there, how they have shaped up. For a buyer, how does it matter when it goes from one seller to another seller. All these points from the case study, when you are going to identify, you will be able to connect to what is a perfect competition. So what is your takeaway about this case study, everybody? Write it in your chat boxes. I want a high competition. What about the number of sellers in the market? What is the size of seller overall? Product is homogeneous. Great, because more or less terms and conditions, interest rates are the same irrespective of whomsoever one is getting whatever credit card one is using. How many sellers are there? Overall 6,000. Okay, entry is easier and even exit is easier. Getting into credit card, those who have accumulated cash reserves, they can get into this credit card industry easily. We are talking about a situation where there are large number of sellers, and US economy is a credit based economy where people have this kind of a culture that whatever are their earnings, they like to spend more. That is the culture. We are a more conservative society. So here credit card culture is not developed in India, but in US it is just the other way around, where credit card industry is developed. The reason being the culture, the taste and preferences of US people is quite different from what we as Indians have. That is the reason this credit card industry, I'm again coming to the point, is very well developed in West. Nowadays it is. We are also becoming like Westerners now, so that is the reason it is being promoted in India. But still we are a conservative society. We like to save more than spend. At least I am like that. I assume most of us are like this. Whatever we earn, we like to save and then spend, not the other way around, that you have to think about your expenditure and later on think about your income generation. We are not that kind. What about others? I think most of us are like this in India. We like to save accordingly, budget it out, and then do our expenditures. We are like this. So all of us are like this. I know that we are middle class people, hard earned money, slightly more prudent. All of us are like this. Okay. So this is what is a market structure which is known as a perfect competition. Okay, only one condition which does not fit in this is that there is no government interference. But when it comes to actual modern economies, there is a government interference when it comes to shaping up of various industries. All of you, assuming that all of you have read this, I am coming back to features of perfect competition. So now I am coming back to what is a perfect competition. On this basis of this case study, we will come to what is a perfect competition. I think all of you have understood the case study. There is no hassle, there is no problem in understanding it. Assuming that all of you are able to understand this, I'll come to the next slide, which is all about perfect competition. Just read the conditions. Just read it for 1 minute, then I'll explain. Entry and exit into the industry. Product is homogeneous. So when it is identical, so no consumer preference. From wherever the consumer buys, the product remains the same. Large number of buyers and sellers. No individual seller can influence the price. That is important out here, that I will be slightly discussing in detail. Along with these features which are being displayed out here, there are other features also of perfect competitions, which include there is perfect knowledge about the product, there is no government interference, the technology remains the same. Okay, there is absolute mobility of factors of production, the same features that we have identified earlier, and again there is no technology change, which makes it slightly theoretical. It means that in perfect competition we have to take into consideration that the product is homogeneous. If the product is heterogeneous and branded and differentiated, then we will talk about a different market structure, Arun, which is known as monopolistic competition. Okay, In perfect competition, these are the features. There are some other features also which are given in the book, like there is no government intervention, I am repeating, no technology changes, mobility of factors of production is there, and there is perfect knowledge about the product. So there are other features also which makes it slightly theoretical, but of course now since you have read the case study, it is easy to identify with this kind of market structure which is known as perfect competition. Perfect competition, the basic underlying feature is that no individual seller has the significance to influence the price. Like another example that I can give you of perfect competition, if we rule out the existence of government in India, that is agriculture industry. Okay, now in agriculture industry, suppose one farmer wants to give a different price to the market other than whatever is the existing price, he or she cannot. The reason being, contribution of individual seller is so low that the seller cannot influence the price. The price is decided by by overall demand and supply situation of the industry. Like for example, vegetables every day, prices of each vegetable as per the demand and supply is decided overall, and then each individual seller has to accept the prices and has to sell at the same price. Okay, so in perfect competition, the sellers or those who are supplying the product in the market, they don't decide the prices. They have to accept whatever the prices are applicable in the market, and these prices are actually decided by what we term as market forces or what we term as demand and supply conditions. Okay, so that is what is perfect competition. When you are going to read it in detail from the book, you will be able to understand what is a perfect competition, what all are the features that are involved in it. Then comes the next part, that is advantages. What all are the advantages? You can read. There can be profits that can be availed. Firms can operate in maximum efficiency because they know what are the prices. Accordingly, they can decide of their price and output situation. Resources can be used in an efficient manner because the firms, they don't have to decide on the prices, they just have to take care of the production part. Pricing is all being decided by demand and supply situation. Then comes oligopoly. I think yes, it is not feasible. Arun, absolutely correct. It is economies of scale is more feasible when organizations no, it is concept is feasible because economies of scale is all about input cost coming down. Here we are talking about the prices. The price at which you are selling in the market is decided by the demand and supply forces in the industry. So concept of economies of scale is a practical scenario when we talk about market structures also, but in economics all these topics are studied separately. While taking a decision in an organization, you can combine, simultaneously use these concepts, but when it comes to economics as a fundamental study, we study these topics separately in isolation. Okay, so that is what is you can say. Arun, I think it can be identified. Economies of scale. Comes oligopoly. Okay, now olig means few. When we are talking about competition amongst few, like for example, most of the industries in India, like automobile industry, even healthcare industry, or to talk about let us say this soap industry and all, these are mostly falling under the category of oligopoly. Now in oligopoly there are few firms in the market, let us say 5 to 7, like airline industry, I have given you already an example. There are 5 to 7 firms in the market which are major stakeholders of the market share, which are having major market share, nearly 80 to 90%, and these these large firms rule this industry. Okay, Again I'm repeating, airline industry, automobile industry, pharma industry, all these industry, most of the industry where there are only few players which you can count on fingers, they are the major market shareholders. Then we are talking about an oligopoly competitive state. Okay, now these are the features of oligopoly. Yes, telecom also, absolutely correct. There are many industries which fall under this oligopoly market structure format. As you can see, it is there are small, large firms, then there can be many firms, but some few firms hold dominancy in the market. Okay, there are high barriers to entry. Entry into this industry is tough. Like I explained you, airlines, getting into it is very tough. Product can be highly differentiated. This can apply even to automobile industry or airline industry. In airline industry, various airlines provide their services in a different fashion. All the airlines have their services defined in a different fashion. Or maybe automobile industry, producing different shapes, sizes, colors of their product in the market. So they can be homogeneous or differentiated or heterogeneous, we can say. Competition always necessary, should not be a pricing competition here. The reason being, like for example, telecom industry, as you pointed out, in telecom industry what has happened, because of TRAI, that regulatory body, and because of a huge level of competition amongst the firms, the consumers were the gainers. There was a price war situation. There is always a price war situation that can come up in an oligopoly market form. The reason being, like for example, Reliance brings down its prices. Okay, Airtel and others will have to. If they don't, then they are going to lose their market share. So we say in oligopoly form of market share, when any organization brings down the prices or cuts down the prices, other organizations have to take some reactive strategies, because if they don't react to it, they are going to lose market share. Either they bring down their prices, or if they keep their prices intact, they lose their market share. So we say that in oligopoly format, firms are sensitive to each other. Strategy of one firm can affect the strategy of another firm, which we say that there is a high degree, the last point, high degree of interdependence between the firms, because if they don't react, they lose market share. Now competition between oligopoly firms can be the price competition, where they are bringing out prices, when one brings down the price or react to pricing strategy, or it can be a non-price competition. Non-price competition is always all about the marketing. Okay, where you differentiate your product from others and accordingly fix the price as per the value proposition of the product in the market. So there can be price competition or non-price competition that can exist in an oligopoly market. And to avoid a price war situation, what oligopoly firms can do is, either they can form a collusion, potential for collision. They can all come together and give the same prices to the overall market rather than fighting amongst themselves. That is collusion or cartel, as I already gave you an example of OPEC. Okay, or what they can do is, there can be some price leadership in the industry. That is, one firm becomes the price leader. Now that price leader can either be the biggest firm, okay, or it can be some firm which is doing its forecasting pretty nicely, which has a good marketing intelligence. By now I am assuming that all of you are through with the marketing portion now. So a firm having good marketing intelligence or good demand forecasting, it can be small, but it can also become a leader in terms of pricing. So that is what is the feature of what we term as oligopoly market structure. Some examples of oligopolistic structures, as you can see: broadcasting, oil, chemicals, banking industry, supermarkets, so on and so forth. Then comes concentration ratio. Just read it. I think you all will be able to understand it. Just read this. All of you will be able to understand it. Okay. Is it clear what is concentration ratio here? Okay. What when we come to monopoly? Monopoly, all of us can understand when there is one firm which is having the major stake, wherein the situation is industry is the firm, or there are other kinds of monopolies where one firm has more than 25%. Sometimes we can say that is a monopoly, or there are certain monopolies which are formed due to natural reasons, natural monopolies, okay, which involve which can involve high fixed cost here, that is gas, electricity, water and telecommunication and rail. These are known as natural I'm sorry, I said natural, by nature. No, it is not that. It is the industries which require high fixed cost that come under what we term as natural monopoly. These are the features of monopoly: high barriers to entry, firm controls prices or output and supply. There are abnormal profits that the firms can earn, possibility of a price discrimination. That is the biggest feature of a monopoly, that it can do price discrimination. Price discrimination strategies can be different at different levels. For example, first level of price discrimination, that suppose there is a doctor in a rural area. Okay, he knows everybody in the village. According to the paying capacity of each individual for the same services that he is delivering, okay, he charged differently. Okay, so that is first level of discrimination. In second level of discrimination, according to batch size, when there is some discrimination that is there, that is like, for example, it used to happen earlier that STD charges for peak hours were different, for non-peak hours were different. That is second degree of discrimination. And third degree of discrimination that a monopolist can do is all about market segmentation. That is like, for example, suppose there is a coffee manufacturer who is a monopolist. He can give different prices to different geographical markets, where in south he can price the same coffee differently owing to its higher demand in the market. In north, for the same coffee he can charge differently as per the target market. So there are various kinds of discrimination that the monopolist can do in order to optimize its profits. Okay, here in monopoly, as we all can understand, consumers' choice becomes limited, and the prices are all set by the monopolist. But here one thing that you all need to understand, even for a monopolist, if there are no close substitutes, there can be some substitutes which can also reflect on the demand of a monopolist. Like, for example, when we say Indian Railways is a monopoly in India, but if we talk about, say, first class AC compartment of monopoly in India, then if its prices are jacked up to at par with airline fares, then people will start preferring airlines rather than this AC first class that is provided by Indian Railways. So what I'm trying to say is that even if there is a monopolist in the market, then also the monopolist faces the same law of demand. Its demand might come down when the prices go up. When the prices go down, demand might come down, unless and until the monopoly that exists is typically for a necessary good. It might have the same law of demand that it will follow. So that is what is prevalent when we talk about, say, monopoly. It can decide the prices, but it has to follow law of demand. Its demand can be elastic or inelastic. It depends on the kind of product that monopoly is handling. And yes, in today's we don't have, the reason being these kind of monopolies that exist, they are typically controlled by the government. there was initially one act which is known as MRTP Act, a Monopolistic Restrictive Trade Practices Act, which was there, which tries to actually lower down the level of monopolies in any market situation, because with higher level of monopolies what can exist is what we term as exploitation of consumers, which no government will want. Government will want a healthy state of competition amongst the private players, and thus stabilizing on the price. Otherwise, if more of monopolies are generated in any nation, then it can have a very a very bad impact, because they can exploit consumers. They are the price deciders. And cartel, when group comes together, it becomes a monopoly, you can say that. But cartels, existence of formal cartels are very less. You don't find much of cartels existing in marketplace, because even though they can form a cartel, they are competition to each other. So I mean, there are a lot many complexities other than formation of cartels. Cartels can be informal, like I talked about builders, or there was airline industry. There was a news at a point of time where there was a discussion that there was a high level meeting called for better airports and all, but that high level meeting was for deciding on increasing the price of airline industry. Informal cartel formations can be there, but formal cartels do not exist when we talk about private players, because they are at the same time competitors to each other also. So not a very common phenomena when we talk about, say, cartel formation. It is not very easy also to form. But what about airlines? They increase their prices. Do they have high barriers to entry? Is all about entering into the industry. It is just like when Mr. Malia wanted to enter into that airline industry. Barriers to entry is not for the consumers that we are talking about. It is more from the seller's point of view. Working gas mostly will come under a duopoly state where there are two players in the market. Yes, you can say that.